This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have debut author Marisa Walz here to talk about her new release, Good Intentions. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for writing this book. You had me in mental and emotional pretzels from the start to the very end of this story.
That is music to my ears. That's exactly what I was trying to do.
Well, you did that and then some. I can promise you. Before we start getting into all the little nitty-gritty of how awesome this book is, could you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
Yeah, so Good Intentions is a psychological suspense novel about a luxury event planner who becomes obsessed with a woman she meets in a hospital waiting room on the same day that she loses her twin. So it's a story about grief and obsession. It's a story about moral ambiguity. It's about the way that loss can completely mess with our sense of reality. And my main character, Katie, has just lost her twin sister at the start of this story. And this just really sends her off on this wild journey of trying to cope with that loss. And she just does not cope well. She's completely unhinged and becomes even more so as the story goes on. And losing her sister just really sets her off down a bad path. She wants to be good. You know, she just keeps making really bad choices, like the worst possible option. And watching her unravel is excruciating and frustrating sometimes, but I hope also still deeply human on some level. I think the really scary thing about this book is finding yourself relating to her every now and then. Or maybe you won't. Maybe some people won't, and that's fine too. I intended for the book to be provocative and to stir up some heated book club discussions. So.
Well, what I loved about it was there are those points that are very cringy. And you're like, Katie, what are you doing? No, honey, we need to stop now. This is too much.
Yeah, it's cringy to write sometimes even. I'm like, oh.
I bet. But at the same time, you're looking at it, what she's going through, even though you can't relate to the choices she makes. You can have empathy for the place where it's coming from, where that motivation is coming from.
Yeah.
And what you did so well in this novel too was obviously she's in this insanely traumatized period of her life.
Mm-hmm.
But you also gave us a little glimpses here and there, little tastes as the story unfolded into Katie's backstory. And you made us wonder, is Katie truly, is what we're seeing here truly just this reaction to a horrible thing that's happened in her life? Or have there been seeds of problems with Katie from the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah, and I tried to make them, well, I mean, sometimes they're not very subtle, especially in the present timeline, right? But I tried to do it in ways that, like, maybe she's not that unreliable, and maybe the author's trying to trick us into thinking she's unreliable, and it's really this person or this person that's going to end up being the bad guy. But that was definitely the goal.
It was so fun because it was, in many places, like you said, it was overt, but in other places it was subtle. And the cast of characters, it couldn't have gotten any better in terms of the characters you put around her. If it's okay, I would love to get into the way that you told, or that Katie is telling the reader the story, because she's not really intending to talk to the reader, is she?
No, not at all. So the story is told in a unique point of view. Katie is addressing the entire book to her dead twin sister. And I originally wrote it in first person, but reading it back, it wasn't feeling intimate enough and claustrophobic enough. I wanted it to feel confessional. And once you start to get to know Katie, you really don't buy that she would be self-aware enough to just kind of be like saying all of this for the sake of like telling the story to herself or to anybody else. The one person that she might possibly be able to be honest with is her sister Dana. And so once I realized that, I was like, let's just try this, because it can be kind of tricky to write in first person and not distract the reader. But my goal was to make it feel like I wanted readers to feel like they were Dana. And I wanted it to feel uncomfortable and claustrophobic. Like Katie was whispering like this horrible, like disturbing, escalating story into your ear, and you just couldn't get away from her. So once I started rewriting it that way, I could immediately tell it was working. And I was like, I have to do this.
It was absolutely brilliant. And I loved being Dana, because in the way that she would talk to Dana, it revealed so much about their relationship. Like you said, that intimacy, those assumptions we have about the people that we are close to, things we want to jump ahead and cut them off sometimes when they're about to tell us something or say, oh, wait, stop there. And we're like, no,
I know what you're going to say. Yeah. Yeah.
It was so well done in all of those ways. And like I said, it revealed so much more about Dana that I don't think you could have shared with the reader if you had just, as you said, written it from first person from Katie's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you'll notice, there's not like a whole lot of scenes where she's like being like, remember Dana when this and this happened? And so, yeah, it was very important to kind of nail like their relationship through just the way, like you said, Katie was talking to her sister.
It was so great. And going back to all of those characters, obviously Dana is not alive during it, but she becomes alive. You know, as the reader, we're Dana, we're breathing and seeing through her eyes.
Yeah.
But the other characters, Katie's husband, for example, her parents are in the story as well, some of her clients. And as you said, she is unraveling, and we get really great insights into that. You were so smart, again, very, very precise with the scalpel about what you shared with us and how. It was so very powerful, because when I said you had me in mental twists and in pretzels, I was not kidding. I was like, wait a minute. Wait, what did mom's look just mean? Right? Or she looked at dad. What does that mean about Katie? And what does that mean about what might be going on here? So how did you come up with these amazing characters, just so fully developed, so rich? I mean, what an amazing debut.
Thank you so much. People ask me if I base characters off of real people I know. I think a lot of authors get that question. For me, and I think a lot of authors would probably agree, sometimes, especially when I was writing my first novels, so this is my first one to be published, so I am a debut author, but I've written several novels before this one. And in some of my earlier ones, yeah, I thought it would be easy if I started like with inspiration, like somebody I knew, right? And so I would write that way. They never stay that person. Like, this may sound cheesy, but they really do take on a life of their own, and you almost can't control them. Like they become who they are, and they become nothing like the character you originally set out to do. But, you know, I've always been a hyper aware person of other people's like emotions and their behaviors and how they talk. And I just remember being a kid, and I used to love just listening to my mom and my grandma and my aunts and neighbors talk. And I'd just sit in a little corner with my book and pretend to read. And that was fascinating to me. And I feel like I learned so much. And not just that, but like I've always just been more of an observer of people. I think that's a skill that you have to have if you want to write a very character-rich story, because you really can't fake that or research it. It really comes from somewhere.
And it was so very natural. But getting back to, you know, you coming out of the gates on a debut with this, may I ask, where did the idea for this book come from?
Oh man, I'll have to tell you offline.
Okay.
It's a spoiler. So now that you've read it and you know the ending, you're probably like, oh my God, we have to talk about this.
Yeah.
So the big twist in the novel came from something that happened to me, an experience that I had when I was younger. And it left me with a lot of like lingering questions about good people and bad people. And I always kind of felt like I'd like to write some sort of story that explored the questions that that incident in my past had like kind of brought up in my life, and just never really had a clear idea for it. Like I was waiting for like all the cosmic forces to come together. And then I was reading one night, The Push by Ashley Audrain. And I finished that book. And first of all, it had me hooked from the first line to the very last. But I finished that book that night and I was like, I have to write a book that makes me feel the way this book made me feel. What I meant by that was like a really intense, emotional, dark story that even if you do guess the ending, which I think most readers don't based on the few reviews I've read, but even if you did, like the way it's delivered would still land like a punch. So that was my goal. And then I was like, okay, but what story am I going to build this around? And that old, like lingering in the back of my head idea that wasn't even really an idea. It was just like, somehow I want to explore this theme of, can good people do bad things? It just kind of all came together. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I did not sleep that night. I lay awake in bed the whole night, laying out in my head how I was going to do this. And that book the next day became an outline for Good Intentions, and the rest is history.
You just mentioned the title. And one of the things that you force the reader to grapple with is the concept of good intentions. And it was so aptly named, this book, because I started out and I was like, oh, what's this going to be about? Good intentions. And then I read the first quarter of the book and I thought, oh, I think I know what it means. But then I read the next quarter and I was like, oh, but maybe it means this. And then the next quarter and I was like, oh, no, it's got to mean this over here. And then, like you said, the gut punch in the end really brought it all together in a way that I think really hits that empathy note inside of all of us to wonder. And I wanted to ask you, what is the nature of good intentions and how should we look at the value of a good intention versus our own behavior, good or bad, related to trying to achieve that intention?
Yeah, I love this question because that was the question I wanted when I said earlier that I wanted to spark a heated book club debate. I think that there's not a lot of agreement on this based on what I have seen in reviews of the book. And just like in general, even just like looking in, there's like all sorts of stuff going on in the world today, and people are posting their opinions about it online, and just like the back and forth, like you can just kind of see like we're never going to agree on some of this stuff. So, but for me personally, I do believe that good people can and do bad things. And I believe that most people are good and that everybody does bad things to, varying degrees. Hopefully most don't do it to Katie's degree. But for me personally, I empathize and sympathize with Katie. I don't think she does good things, but I was able to find empathy with her. And I think I would have, even if I hadn't written her and I had been like a reader, not knowing the story and reading along. I do tend to really empathize with and really like stories with a more unhinged female main character than I do the ones that are like, oh, their like flaw is that, they're too vulnerable or they're too nice or something. Like, I don't relate to that.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to give her real flaws that felt, even if you don't agree with her choices or relate very strongly to her or want to be her friend, like hopefully if you're being honest with yourself, you can admit that you can relate to some of the feelings and thoughts she has, and if not the behavior, like at least urge to do some of the things that she does.
And I think that was really a testament to your skill with character and understanding of human psychology, because I will tell you, there were times where I thought, Marisa didn't do any of the typical stuff that they tell you to do as an author, right?
Yeah.
You didn't do any of the things to get us to feel some sort of hero complex for this person, any of those glimpses. And I kept thinking, why do I relate to her? Why am I oddly pulling for her? Like, even when she does something cringy, like I'll need a moment, but then I'm still like, but Katie, you can make it better. And you can turn your life around. And And I think, oddly, as I look at it, even though that's, kind of always been the advice, right, in the literary world, give people something to connect to, give them some element of compassion somewhere, even if they're almost sociopathic everywhere, have one thing that people could hold their...
It is very hidden.
Yeah, very hidden.
You have to dig for it.
You do, but in the cast of characters, that's where we find our empathy for her. And to a big degree, it was a structural choice you made because it was about secrets. And it was about the fact that other people had secrets. And once we started to look at the fact that Katie's not the only one who's doing stuff.
Yeah.
There's other people doing stuff. And what are they doing and why are they doing it? And it's not to say that we should have comparative morality, because we shouldn't necessarily, but it really does give you at least the ability as a human being to empathize in things that we think are not understandable. They really all are, aren't they?
Yeah. That's what I was hoping to do, that would help open the door to finding a little compassion for Katie.
One of the other wonderful things that I will take away from this book was some of the concepts that you grappled with in this. Obviously, you mentioned grief, but you also put grief right up there alongside fear. And I was curious, did you talk to psychiatrists about this? Is it something that you had learned in your own journey in life? The intersection between grief and fear.
Yeah. So yes and no. So this is hard nobody's asked me this exact question before, so I'm kind of thinking about it for the first time, but I guess yes, as I'm thinking about it, because I've always been a deeply feeling child. And so like little things would weigh really heavily on me. So even if I haven't, I've lost grandparents and like have felt that and been very sad. So like I know grief, but like I haven't, thank God, really had to experience something like terribly traumatic, like what Katie had to go through. But I think you can tap into that through other experiences that you've had that have brought around grief. And then I think for the fear part, I'm not somebody who lives in like a ton of fear or who's been through something like where I have to, I was in a terribly scary situation that like traumatized me or anything, except for maybe what we were talking about earlier that we'll talk about offline. But I was also a very anxious child. I had a lot of anxiety. And that pretty much is, to me, chronic fear, like chronic baseline low level fear is what it feels like. So I guess it makes sense that worked its way into the story. And I did wonder a few times when I was writing the story, I was like, I'm loving the heaviness of this story. Like I like anything that makes me feel intensely. So I was okay with it being both really sad and also very disturbing. I didn't know how that would play out when I was trying to get an agent or when we went out on submission and I was trying to get an editor. I didn't know how sellable that would be. But it turned out it worked out fine. There's a market for it. But yeah, I did worry about that.
One of the things I do like in life is I do enjoy exploring all the dark, shady corners, because I do think that there's truth to be found there. And I loved it for all of those reasons. I loved that I was conflicted. I loved that I was cringing. I loved that I was appalled sometimes, and looking at it, like I said, that intersection between grief and fear, I started thinking about that. Well, why are they similar? What did Marisa tap into here? And I was thinking about loss, and grief is obvious with loss.
Yeah. So I did do a little research so I kind of like came up with that line, and I was like, because I think it's Maura, the grief counselor in the story, who introduces this concept to Katie and her grief group. And I was like, where did I come up with that? Because it feels very true, but I got to like explore, is this an actual thing? And it is. And I found some explanations. Grief is like fear of loss, and fear is like fear is always about losing something, whether it's like control or a person or yourself or an actual object, like losing your kids in the mall. Like it's always everything that you're scared of. It has to do with loss. And so grief is about loss. And so it makes a whole lot of sense that they become so entangled.
Well, again, entangled emotions, entangled everything. So very well done. Now, Marisa, this is your debut, so there are going to be fans and fans flocking to you. Where should they flock? Where is the best place for them to find you? Is it social media, or is it your website, or where can
I would say where I spend the most time and keep things the most updated is on Instagram, and my handle is at Marisa C. Walz. And I do keep my website updated with a lot of information. There's a lot of all my tour dates out there. So I've got a whole bunch of fun events planned. And that's at marisawalz.com.
Wonderful. And again, can't say enough about this new book. It is called Good Intentions, and what a mental and emotional thrill ride.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.